talk about the play, or the movie, um, or the production, whatever version you watched, and without me giving you lots of background on his on Dickens' religious views or beliefs, because I don't want that to that information to limit our discussion, and then I will come back around and share some of the big influences that he had in his own religious life and that of his children. I'll give you this background. Um, he his parents raised him in the church, although people say somewhat nominally. Um, he was certainly part of the established church as a child, the Church of England, Anglicanism. Um, his father was apparently a very gifted actor, but also that landed him in debtor's prison because he would amass lots and lots of debts. So when Dickens writes about the conditions of child labor, it's because Dickens spent time working 12 hours a day, pasting labels on bottles. Um, and he had the experience of being a child laborer. He had the experience of his father being in debtor's prison. Although that was not his entire existence, he did have that. He did have that experience. Um, he went to school. He was very active in school. He owes a lot. He gives credit to his teachers and his headmasters for their influence um, in his in his ability to write and to tell a story. Um, and his faith is a huge part of why he tells a story. And as I said, I want to kind of hold off on that because I just don't want to. I don't want that to unduly influence our discussion. So we'll come back to that. He wrote, obviously, in the Victorian period, which was a time of great social. I get for those who had it was a great time. For those who didn't, it was a horrible time. There was a tremendous amount of inequality socially, economically, financially during the Victorian period. And Dickens certainly points that out. I think his books are definitely commentaries on how not everyone accepted the system as it was. Um, but there were a handful of people with lots of titles, lots of land, lots of power, and everybody else um, kind of worked at their behest and worked for them and followed their rules. So there's much division. It was a time also of great expansion in the British Empire. So you had the influences of others, other nationalities, other lands, people going and coming back. Travel by steamboat was available, or by steam engine was available. So you had people traversing the oceans and going to these far flung places, and even amassing more wealth and accumulating more power. So that was a part of his experience as well. So let me stop there, go around like we've been doing, and we can start with Deanna. She's on my top part of the screen in the Hollywood Squares, and she can start by telling us what she likes and what stood out to her about A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, can I go at the end? Because I don't remember. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a long time, and I haven't seen it recently. So I don't know if I could say that anything.
What a cop out. Okay, Anne and Reggie, you're up next.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Okay.
I think the thing that I got out of it, it's a story of redemption from beginning to end, no matter how you get it. That here's a man who you think is the most evil man in the world, and then through either his own conscience, where that's where your dreams come from, but there was this story of just redemption and hope, that the hope of the Cratchits and the redemption of Scrooge.
Okay. Anne, you want to add anything?
Well, the Cratchits seemed very, their happiness within themselves, and even though they were very poor, and that seemed apparent. And the fact that Bob Cratchit didn't seem to have any anger toward the meanness of Scrooge and the, how demanding and selfish he actually was.
Okay. Will Hill, you're next.
Yeah, I'll just say I hold a little bit of a contrarian view about the story. I mean, the story is a wonderful story about discovering the importance of human kindness. It's an infomercial for philanthropy. I don't find it a Christian story. I find it to be a wonderful story about a man who comes to understand how horrible he is, and he comes to understand about why that is. The love of his life explains to him that the reason why he's unacceptable to her is because he fears the world and is willing to do anything to make sure the world does not overwhelm him. He's inspired to do better, but there really is no sort of understanding that he is a morally flawed individual that is saved by grace. His ex-partner, Jacob Marley, comes a lot closer when he seems to have an understanding about how impoverished his soul is, and he tells Scrooge that mankind was his business and all of that. But you could parachute this same story into any other religious culture, Jewish culture, an Islamic culture, a secular culture. And I think it would be just as powerful about just being kind to other people and understanding the responsibility you have for the well-being of your fellow man. But I don't find it to be a particularly Christian story. That's my view of it.
Okay. Scrooge Tankersley, he's weighed in. Kat?
Okay, we're here?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can make one Christian link to it myself. First thing I would say, not the Christian link about it. Rah, Scrooge got saved, but I kept feeling sorry for what happened to his ex-wife. She wasn't apparently worthy to be saved. The Christian link that I put with this, it kind of reminds me, you got this guy that's horrible all his life. Right at the end, he gets saved. Now, he doesn't die right off, but it reminds me of the crucifixion, when you have the robber or the criminal there with Jesus that's not done anything his whole life worth a flip, and all of a sudden he gets saved right there at the last second. And some of this just doesn't seem to gel out as being quite fair. But I can make that analogy.
Okay. Kat, you want to add anything?
I mean, the main thing to me about the movie is I think that whenever I see the story, hear the story, watch the movie, the memories just that it brings back of all of the different times of having heard it. I mean, to me, it's there's always good feelings with going back and with having watched it with other people and so forth growing up. So, I mean, to me, it's like, the story is a story that's told over and over. And, the Cratchits are a poor family, but, whenever you see the movies, they're such real people that, it's not like they're shown as sometimes we might think that poor people are would be depicted, in what our view might be of sometimes. So, to me, it's mainly just about the memories of watching this all the years.
Perfect. I like y'all's your name. Everybody see that? 2 people who have COVID vaccines.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
thank you.
and it's sort of like we're making a statement, like we've had them, we believe they're okay. So, we're just kind of putting that out there.
Good deal. Cam, you're next. And the Muppets.
Well, I watched it with my 3-year-old grandson, and he had a very concerned look on his face for the whole first part of the Muppet. I mean, we watched the Muppet one, but at the end, he just, he said, he didn't really talk a lot during the thing. He liked the music, but then at the end, he went, "Scrooge turned nice," and I was glad he got it. But and I don't really have any big reflection except for that I kept thinking of the Who's and Whoville and how their positive love, kind of changed the Grinch's heart, and the Cratchits, the fact that Cratchit wasn't holding anger against Ebenezer, I think was part of what helped Ebenezer Scrooge be able to live into what he learned from the dreams. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can I
Jimmy?
go now? Can I go? I thought of what I want to say.
Yeah, sorry, Jimmy, you gotta wait. Deanna?
Sorry. I think I remember when I was watching it, the thing that struck me the most was when he encountered his name on his gravestone. And there was this sense of, he was witnessing that somebody had died, and belongings were getting distributed, and some people were really celebrating, but he didn't realize it was him. And then he sees his name on the tombstone, and that's kind of where this sense of, I don't want to end like this. And that he realized the gift, I think, that the spirits were showing him is he actually had choices that he could make to change that outcome. But I remember seeing this when I was, probably maybe 10 or 11. I do remember that aspect. It was the ghost of the future that really sort of captured my attention as a young person. It was him seeing his gravestone that sort of terrified him. So I think there's my input.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Jimmy.
First let me say that my son and his fiance just came in from Houston with all their animals, and they're running around the kitchen behind me. So you may hear them. But for today's lesson, I watched the 1938 version of the film, and I don't remember any of the other films. So I'm just going to focus on that one. But before I watched the film, I actually watched it this afternoon. I had some time off in the afternoon, and I had my phone on and had Prime Video. So I was listening to it, kind of halfway watching it, but I followed it pretty closely. But this morning, I listened to a New York Times podcast coming into work on the social life of forests. And the whole concept of it was this forester had discovered that underneath the earth, all of the fungi and the enzymes and the microbes are working together to allow trees in the forest work together to share carbon so that they can live together. A forest is not a bunch of individual trees. They're in the forest and they're depending upon each other to share their nutrients, depending on who needs it. And they don't think that that's a benevolent exercise. They think that that's fungi themselves trying to survive themselves. But as a result, the weaker species of trees get the benefit of those fungi doing that. But the whole concept was, if a forest does not cooperate, it does not live. And so when I watched the movie, I saw the same thing. Scrooge did not cooperate with anyone, and he was shriveling up into a dry prune. Everybody else in the movie was sweet as sugar. And okay, that's fine. Scrooge turned sweet as sugar too quick. Too quick. It took one ghost. And he says, I've seen enough. I'm ready to go back to it. And I thought, no. You are too bad to turn that quick. And I think maybe the other movies, it took seeing the gravestone maybe until he finally turned. But the concept was the same as what I heard in the morning on the podcast. Cooperation is how we survive. We are social animals. We live in community. We cannot live alone and survive. And that is no accident. That is the way it works. So that was my take for the day.
Jimmy, I sure wish you had not told the whole group that and shared that with me so I would have my Christmas Eve sermon finished.
Well, just keep this in your pocket. Don't share it with anybody and we won't tell.
Okay, perfect.
Jimmy can read.
Yeah, what are you doing on Christmas Eve, Jimmy?
I vote Will Hill.
Yeah, that'll be a great sermon. It's all therapy by ghost.
Okay, Jim and Betsy?
Mine's pretty straightforward. The Christian perspective, I guess, would be we should strive to be better people. And it's never too late. Betsy's not in the room right now, but she said redemption was her takeaway. And God bless us, everyone.
Thank you. Rosa?
I watched the 1938 version too, Jimmy. And it was interesting. It was hard for me to understand because I don't hear too well anyway. The dog chewed up one of my hearing aids. But I really enjoyed it. And by the end of it, I was more in tune to the how people spoke so I could understand it better. I think what I get out of the Christmas Carol is that some of us do not see what we're doing. We don't know and we don't understand. And we should all strive to work together, to be good to each other. And the world would be a better place. Scrooge was one man who was affecting so many lives. One of the things that was interesting to me, and I may have gotten this wrong, but I thought it was Tiny Tim that said, "God bless us, everyone." But in the old movie, it was Scrooge that said it, wasn't it? Or did I mess that up? And that surprised me. But I liked it. So even if I got the wrong thing out of it, it was fun. Strangely, after the watching that, then I was sitting around thumbing through the shows on TV, and I came across the Lifetime movie of the minute of the hour, and it was the Christmas Carol with a modern twist to it. And I thought, this is a story that people are still trying to tell, and they're trying to tell it from the point of view that this one person is redeemed, rather than the effect of that redemption on everybody else. So I don't know. I enjoyed the movie. I didn't get real deep into it except to sit back and say, okay, now let's just think about this for a while and see what's going to happen next. I like Jimmy's forest and trees and the communication going on underneath the ground. Very, very much. Thank you, Jimmy.
I've got Dick and Dorothy next. You guys want to say anything? All right, I've got Melissa and John.
All right, getting there. Okay. So I have to say the version we're kind of partial to is the 1980s version. It has George C. Scott in it. Love that one. But in that one,
you want Patton to be your Scrooge.
I did, really. So,
Okay.
But Jimmy, in that one, he progresses in stages, like at each event, like he moves a little closer, right? But the thing that I take away from it is how completely comfortable and arrogant he is in his ignorance. And it takes seeing this stuff. To me, there's no real conversion. His heart doesn't change. All it takes is his paradigm shifts, because you show him all these things about what's really happening in the world, and he realizes the way I've looked at the world, remember that part, there's a part in the movie where he says, are there no workhouses? Is the treadmill still in operation? And he thinks that's good enough, right? Till he actually is exposed to it and realizes, oh crap, my whole worldview is wrong. And so I think there's always that goodness inside of him. It just took showing him how his worldview, his comfort, if you will, had to be shaken loose. And when it was, he realized, oh my gosh, I've been looking at the world completely wrong all this time. I was so comfortable in my worldview, and now it's all shaken up. So anyway, that's what I get out of it. And
This is Dorothy, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this stuff. So that's why last week and this week you haven't heard us. One thing, and I think it's already been touched on, that I was trying to compare all of the movies we've talked about. And of course, the thing I came up with most of all, but Christmas Vacation kind of gets thrown out the window. But, everybody has a change of heart. And that's sort of the common theme with these movies.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Going absolutely last, I have nothing to say that hasn't already been said much better. I'll just add that I enjoy the movie. It's a tradition. We watch it every year. We watch the George C. Scott one. I like Dickens in general. I read a lot of Dickens books, and I just enjoy the time period. I enjoy the costumes. I enjoy the way Dickens phrases things. I love his phraseology. I enjoy the comedy, believe it or not, the comedic element to Scrooge. He's funny at the beginning before he gets so terrified by his awakening. But I enjoy the comedy. I enjoy the goodness of the purely good characters like Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit, pure goodness in the face of evil Scrooge. They never waver. Tiny Tim never wavers in his faith that he'll get better. And his dad never wavers in his high regard, if you will, for his boss, as badly as his boss treats him. It's just, to me, a feel-good thing. At the end, it's good, it's happy, he's changed, Tiny Tim lives. It's just a tradition, and I enjoy it.
Well, Dudley on my screen gets the last word. So
Well, that was kind, particularly since I hadn't seen the movie in probably 30 years. But and I'm not sure I can add anything. The character Scrooge and I guess all of the Cratchits seem, I'd say they're like a caricature. This has pretty much been said, but Scrooge, there's no such thing as a person, I don't think, who's just purely evil. And but he was a caricature of a bad person. And then I guess all of the Cratchits were like a caricature of people who were only good. And I'm not sure that that's really exists among us either. And in the end, I agree. I don't think Scrooge became a different person. I think that he made a choice, at that point in the movie when I guess the redemption occurred. He chose the good. And I think that the truth is we have to make that choice in real life, moment by moment. We have it every moment of every day.
thank you, Dudley.
I wanted to say something that I was realizing as everybody was talking is, I'm in a dream group and we study our dreams. And if we think about the visitations of these ghosts as dreams, then what I really think it was very Jungian. If he was looking at, his shadow was being revealed in each dream, maybe a different part of his shadow self was being brought to the light. And and when that happens, that's when we become redeemed. But I like looking at them not as ghosts, but as, well, I mean ghosts, but that they were dreams, and that they were his dreams, and they helped heal him.
What I'm curious as to what would prompt each of us to look at our past, our present, and our future. In other words, what would cause us to do that work? Because you have that happen with in It's a Wonderful Life. You also have it happen here that Scrooge is forced to look at all the implications of his life in the past, in the present, and going forward in the future, if all things remain the same. What prompts us to do that type of introspection and reflection? Does anything?
Oh, I think a lot of things do. This is Rosa talking. I think any dramatic change in life, retirement, the death of a spouse, a significant change or move that you might make, and then age. I think people go through certain stages or ages where we tend to look back and say, have I done anything worthwhile? Has my life really mattered? So yeah, I think it's a very ordinary thing that people do, or I'm really weird, one or the other. Maybe the latter.
It could be both.
Yeah,
unquestionably, but John.
You know, I would agree with Rosa on that, and I'd also say the arts help us see that, because I think we have sort of a default position that there's a future out there and it's just unrolling and we don't know what it is, but we've kind of prepared ourselves so that it rolls in a certain direction, and we're really not prepared for the fact that the future is not laid out and it could go in all kind of different directions. And this movie and literature does that. It teaches us that we don't know what's going to happen, but we have a big part in that. We participate in that in a big way. And this movie does a great deal about teaching that lesson. So, and all these movies that we talked about. So I would say the arts and the humanities make a huge difference in that.
I would say also, I've run into this through the years. You know, people, a patient or somebody will get a maybe not an immediately terminal diagnosis, but their health changes in a way that they're forced to look at their functional capacity or what they're doing. And I've seen a number of folks through the years who've made changes based on that.
Yeah, I agree. It's you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, John.
No, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's used trauma. We tend to sort of float along like we're in a dream under this delusion, really, that we have some control and that we have some ability to sort of not predict the future, but to, you know, some expectation about what's coming next. And trauma comes along in many different forms, but it's like it slaps us in the face, and really what it does is it brings us back to reality. It takes us out of the, you know, delusion that we live in, that we have some security, because we have none. But it's trauma.
I would say it's failure. Failure is a great motivator to examine what's going on in your life, and whether it's a failure of health or failure about your own expectations or some horrible calamity for people you care about. Again, it's failure that sort of upsets and upends your world and causes you to have to look at things in a different way.
I take back what I said. I don't want Tiger Sleep preaching next Sunday.
Too dark.
But I would say, you know, we do have unpredictable things that happen, but we do play a role. We do make choices that make a difference as to how our future unfolds. And we have to be deliberate about that. And that much we can control. Not all of it, but it makes a big difference.
sometimes I think we have to get miserable enough to be willing to look at our past and and make any change.
I like that. I think Scrooge embodies the misery. He's high up on the misery index, and it is compelling. It is a compelling reason to think about one's life. You guys are describing, all of you in different ways, are describing what Richard Rohr would call, and especially in his book Falling Upward, the death of one's ego. That you get to a point in life, and it's prompted by something, generally a transition. It can be the middle of one's life. It can be the death of a relationship. It can be the death of or loss of a job. It can be all kinds of transitions that prompt it. But what he in essence says is that it is only when we realize that we have been feeding our ego, and we stop feeding that, and we actually tend to the person that God has made us to be, our true selves, that we discover the abundance and the richness of our lives as they are and as they can be. So his point would be that we spend a whole lot of time in life feeding our ego for nothing. That gets us nothing. In the end, that's empty. And at some point, we are forced to do the reckoning with that and be the person that God has made us to be. And so I think for A Christmas Carol, that's a lot of what's going on with Scrooge. I think it's caused by trauma. I think it's caused by all kinds of things. But I think the real change for him is allowing the spirits, allowing introspection, his dreams, to force him to become the person that God had already made him to be. And to get rid of the ego and all the other stuff that was covering that up, that was protecting him from that. And we do that. We do that. We create all kinds of reasons to resist affection, to resist friendship, to resist love, to resist vulnerability, to resist humility, all kinds of ways to keep ourselves risk-free from anything that might feel. And we have a hands-off approach and say, well, other people are taking care of these problems, so I don't have to really worry about it. It's not about me. I don't have a say in it. I don't have a role in it. And that clearly gets turned on its head in A Christmas Carol. I liken it to, everybody familiar with the song we sing, I Sing a Song of the Saints of God?
Mhm.
Okay. And we sing about all these saints, and we contextualize them and put them in a contemporary setting. It's a beautiful hymn. But there's a line in the last verse says, I don't see any reason, none in the least, why I can't be one too. Okay? And that's kind of what's within Scrooge. There's no reason he can't be a saint except all the reasons he has created for himself to avoid that. And so in part, deep down, we all have that capacity. I would argue it's only deep down because we've covered it up with all the protective things that we do in life. Somebody go ahead. So I do want to push against Will's anti-Christian sentiment a little bit.
Anti-Christian.
There's a quote that I came across in somebody doing some work about Charles Dickens, and he wrote this: with a deep sense of my great responsibility always upon me when I exercise my art, that is writing, one of my most constant and most earnest endeavors has been to exhibit in all my good people some faint reflections of the teachings of our great master. Okay, so they're the Cratchits, right? Despite always being shunned, abused, by Scrooge and all his negativity, they hold fast to the faith. And unostentatiously to lead the reader up to those teachings as the great source of moral goodness. He then continues to say this: all my strongest illustrations are derived from the New Testament. All my social abuses are shown as departures from its spirit. So let's stop there. He is a tremendous critic in all of his works on the social abuses. I cannot speak tonight. I'm sorry. He finds little patience for the institutions that have been created not to solve the problems of society, but to respond to them. Okay, which is a big difference. So workhouses and prisons, and he would even go far, and we'll come back to this in a minute, say religion itself, the institution of religion, the institutional church, simply respond to the consequences of poor structure and a lack of compassion. And he believes that's the wrong approach. And for him, the church is as guilty of it as anyone. So we'll come back. All his good people are humble, charitable, faithful, and forgiving. Over and over again, he writes, I claim them in express words as disciples of the founder of our religion. So God bless us. That is an affirmation that God is ultimately good and God is beneficent, right? That is that a benevolent God, despite the fact that everything around the Cratchits we find lacking, perhaps. They don't. So those are Dickens' words, not mine. And whether or not he is trying to write A Christmas Carol as a tool for Christian conversion is, I don't think he is doing that at all. I believe he's writing it as a way of trying to convert, and I'm going to steal from John Carter. He's trying to convert the worldview. What is the acceptable worldview for Dickens is intolerable. And it is decidedly not Christian. Of the Victorian era, of the time frame in which he writes. One of the things that came up consistently in my research was the idea of charity, and both expressed by social organizations, but most of those were propagated by the church. And he had and I frankly, just to be transparent, I share this worldview with him. That charity that simply gives aid and relief to people is while it can appease an immediate need, it does not address the real concerns of the world. It does not address the causes or the structures or the institutional embedment of poverty, of poor education, of the financial system, of which in the Victorian era only a few could participate. If you were a Victorian and you did not have means, and you were not titled, you did not have land, which also meant you were titled, it operated like a kind of a tenant farm. And they kept the books so that you could never catch up, right? So if y'all know how the old tenant farms worked and the commissaries worked, if you needed a pencil, the pencil could cost you 10 cents or $1. It depended on what they needed from you. And so in many ways, the Victorian financial system, the economic system in those days was very similar. You could be charged whatever the people who were in power wanted to charge you, and therefore bound you into their work, into their debt. You were literally indebted to them, and they had power and control over you. He has a lot of commentary on that in Great Expectations in other books. But that was a lot of what he's fighting against. So when he says to the people who come in who are asking for charity, aren't there workhouses, aren't there prisons, aren't there this? His point is that your charity is going to do nothing. Me giving to you is not going to solve a single problem. It may not even be that he's evil. Who said that earlier? It's just that he realizes that that's a dumb way to spend money. He viewed the church with a lot of skepticism because the church was more often a participant in the addressing people's immediate needs rather than being an advocate for change of the systems that cause poverty, hunger, poor work conditions. The church was more often complicit than in opposition to those things. And so for him, the church had lost a lot of its voice, a lot of its integrity. Although he did not lose his faith because of that, he lost a lot of confidence in the institutional church. Let me say a couple more things, then I'll shut up and get your responses. He wrote in a couple of letters to his children when they were going off to college. To his son Harry, he said, deeply respecting and bowing down before the character of our Savior, you cannot go very wrong and will always preserve at heart a true spirit of veneration and humility. He's asking his son to be like Bob Cratchit. He says to a different son, Edward, who's moving to Australia, I put a New Testament among your books because it is the best book that ever was or will be known in the world, and because it teaches you the best lessons by which any human creature who tries to be truthful and faithful to duty can possibly be guided. So his faith is really about works and the practice of good works, and not about doctrine and dogma, because he viewed doctrine and dogma as that which institutionalized the church and kept it and created a paralysis from it actually responding to social needs. I would argue, just for fun for this, that Scrooge is not only representative of an individual, but it's also the possibility of an institution to do the work that it takes to actually make a difference in the world in which it exists. So Scrooge can be an individual, or Scrooge can be the church, or Scrooge can be the social, any type of institution that is numb to the social needs of the people around them. So I see it both individual and collectively, communally. Okay, I'll be quiet and get your reactions to that. Anybody?
I completely agree that we spend this is Rosa, that we spend way too much time trying to fix problems by not dealing with the problem, but by painting over the surface. You know, I like the commercial, the saying that, you know, I don't know how it goes really, but if you give somebody a goat and they'll have dinner, but if you teach him how to farm, he'll have dinner all his life. You know, it's how do you address a social ill just by, or any kind of ill. And I call the first painting over it. You're dealing with the instant at hand, but you're not dealing with the problem. And as soon as the goat's eaten, that's all there is. And we do that. I could get on my soapbox and start preaching, which nobody needs me to do or wants me to do. But that's how we address social issues, and have at least since the 1930s and the Great Depression. I guess then they had 40 acres and a mule, or 120 acres, and did try to lead people to farm. But then we got in this giveaway culture. And I don't think there's anything wrong with giving away. I think that that's a bottomless pit, and that we create more problems than we fix. Now somebody else can talk.
I'm interested, John, and go ahead.
I found it interesting in the book by Trevor Noah. He wrote Born a Crime because his mother was Black and his father was German. He spoke about how he got out of poverty. And he spoke about that saying of give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. He said, we miss the point there that you have to give the man the fishing pole. If they don't have the equipment, they can't fish. And in the poverty that they're in, they never get ahead enough to get that middle necessity. And so they're always going back and putting money back in to either their survival or a family's survival. Anyway.
Right. And to just to pull it around to part of what I think, and again, in my reading about Dickens himself, is what he saw, and I'll stick to the church because I don't want to, we need to look at ourselves and have our own ghosts come haunt us. But one of the things that frustrates him about the church is that people are there, the church, at least in the Victorian era, that people were more interested in saving the souls of those with need rather than addressing their need as a means by which, for example, I will feed you if you accept Jesus. Why? I mean, that's his criticism. Why does the church see it that way? Why is their help immediately tied to their fear and their concern about one's salvation? And so even their help was conditional and required some subjugation on the part of those who had the greatest need. So, Dudley, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I'm interested in, I've been mulling around in my head for several weeks, ideas about institutions, the role of our institutions, including the church, government institutions, and the role of individuals, and in relation to society as a whole, and to government. And I think that institutions, one point that I would make is that institutions are like individuals in that we all have the ability and eventually will do good things and bad things. And I don't know if there's any way out of that circular, problem. We can give him the fish, and we can teach him to fish. But the truth is, the cycle is going to continue. And I don't really know what the answer is. I'm tending to think, at least as of this morning, that basically we can focus on trying to be a person who makes the momentary decision as often as we can each day, to either, provide the fish or the fishing rod, to make I guess maybe live like Christ. And basically that's what we can do. And maybe by doing that, we can each influence to the degree that we each can, our institutions, our church, our government, and other people.
Yeah. The thing I would add to that is I don't know that as people, as individuals, or as institutions, we do a very good job of saying what is forced upon them, forced upon Scrooge in the Visitations is, what if we did it differently? We rarely are willing to ask the question, what if I did it differently? What's the win if I am different? What's the win if I am more Christ-like? Because the win means we're not going to stay the same. The win is that the institution doesn't stay the same. And very, very few institutions have any interest in changing whatsoever. And a lot of us as people have resist change. The benefit that Scrooge has is he's forced to look at the what if. As is Jimmy Stewart's character, George Bailey, in It's a Wonderful Life. Will, you're being quiet. What do you think?
I just don't buy it. No offense, but I mean, again, it's wonderful that Scrooge, the character Scrooge, is a nice guy at the end, giving lots of stuff away. I mean, in a way you can look at it as this is completely transactional. He doesn't want to end up like his former partner, Jacob Marley. I know this is not the way you've characterized Bob Cratchit, who is an example of a Christ-like figure in the sense that he suffers and with the hope and really having a good influence on all those around him. But Scrooge didn't teach Cratchit how to fish. He made him a partner of the firm. I mean, he just shared the benefits more equitably from his company. So again, I think that this book is a tremendous endorsement of human kindness and of philanthropy, but I don't get much of a religious message out of it. I see it really as being as having the thesis that you can earn your way to redemption. And I just disagree with that very powerfully. It would have been more helpful, more interesting to me if Scrooge had asked somebody for their forgiveness. I mean, instead of saying, hey, Bob Cratchit, you're going to be a partner of the firm, your financial troubles are going to be over and your son's sickness is going to be taken care of. To me, it would have been much more powerful if he'd said, Bob Cratchit, I beg your forgiveness. I have been horrible to you. I now see it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I ask it of you anyway. To me, that would have been a greater Christian climax to the story.
But Will, don't you think that was implicit in the ending?
I don't think so. I really don't. I see it again as Scrooge wants to be liked. He doesn't want to end up as like Jacob Marley, burdened by gigantic chains that he forged during his lifetime. I just don't see that. I think it's, I think it's wonderful and pleasing and a more valid way to live, to be more charitable to your fellow man. But I don't see that as a particularly Christian message. I see that as something that is just something about how it's good to be generous to people and to try to help the helpless.
And you had something you're going to say a little bit ago.
Oh, well, to go back to your, the church using food or a carrot as motivation and saying, when you come to this service and we'll give you food, or believe and we'll give you food, or what the missionaries did years ago is it's this idea that we know what you need. We know what you need to think. And if you think this way, you'll be saved, and here's your meal. That's all.
Well, like I said, I only watched the Muppet one, but they really painted when he was going back into the past, and they really showed you, how he came to be who he was, and how he came to be so much a person who was a workaholic and thought everybody else should be too, and, valued, money and, making, I don't know if he valued the money as much as he valued making the money. And I think that each visitation showed him more about himself. And that was the process of, more about how how he had become the way he was. And, he gave up his love, his true love, because he thought he needed to, have enough money to support her in the way, in his own mind, the way he thought he should. And I just, I think that even though he didn't directly ask for forgiveness, I think what it was more about was he became more self-aware and of his faults, and at least in my opinion, he did change. And but change is a process too, so it doesn't happen overnight. But this was a story. But I just think he was awakened to things that he had not realized. He became, like you said, he stopped looking at ego, and he was, at least in the version I saw, he had a lot of influences that helped create him to become so far away from the person that God created him to be. And then I think, and the dreams helped him get back in touch with the person that God created him to be. That's it.
One of the things I've done each week is to look at the readings for the corresponding Sundays, the lectionary, the assigned text for Sundays. And it's interesting that I'm going to use 3 different readings because I want to believe, despite Will Hill's protest to the contrary, I want to believe these have some influence on how maybe Dickens wrote it, but how we see Scrooge. Okay, so I'm going to read this from the 3rd Sunday of Advent this past week, which we're only reading 2 lessons. We did not hear this from 1 Thessalonians. We hear this: rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances. Maybe you can hear Bob Cratchit in that. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the spirit. Do not despise the words of prophets, but test everything. Hold fast to what is good. Abstain from every form of evil. Okay. From the Magnificat. As Mary says, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones. He has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. And from Isaiah 61 this past week. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. So those were all from last Sunday. And because of professional liability, I think probably Deanna thinks this way as well. I can't read one thing and do one thing and not have that resonating in what I'm doing. So it's unfairly influenced how I've considered A Christmas Carol this year, probably. But I do think that A Christmas Carol is still wrestling with that stuff. I think it's trying to make sense of those words and why it is. And this is why, whether it's Christian or it's certainly, I mean, you could argue that Dickens' approach in A Christmas Carol and some of his other works that give his perspective on his Christian life is much more Jewish in that it is about works. It's about mitzvah. It's about doing your faith and not talking about your faith. It is about being your faith and not about being your faith based on how many lives you save and how many people you convert, how many souls you save and how many people you convert. That good works is to be done here and now, because as Jimmy alluded to earlier, what we say and what we do impacts not only who we are, but how others' lives are affected. And not in the sense that we need to save their souls from some eternal punishment, but rather, can we make sure they're not hungry tonight? So I do think those readings that we had last week I think they resonate and echo around in A Christmas Carol. I think Melissa said this too. You also have to read it. There's a lot of humor in A Christmas Carol. I mean, it's just funny. There are parts of it because he's so outlandish and so ridiculous, and you even have to suspend. I mean, some of the most profound quotes are funny. I think they are anyway, so it's worth considering that. Dudley, you just lit up.
I was just thinking one of the funny. I hadn't read the book in a long time, and I remember one of the lines. One of the first ghosts he saw, he couldn't decide whether that was undigested bit of his dinner.
That's right. Yeah. Is this heartburn or is this a ghost? That's a question I always ask in the middle of the night. But John Daly encounters that. Doc, I'm either having heartburn or I'm being visited by ghosts. I don't know which.
Okay.
Yeah, they ask that question all the time.
That's right. All right. Anybody else for the good of the order?
Enjoyed it, John. It was a good class.
Well, this was fun. Thank you guys for participating. Thanks for humoring this. Thanks for taking the time to read the books and to watch the movies and watch the shows and to participate. I hope it's been fun. I hope it's just a good way that sometimes when we're watching things and thinking about things that it causes us to reflect on our past, our present, and our future, if nothing else. Because all those movies do that. They have some point where you've got to kind of take stock of your life and say, what's going on here? Well, thank you guys. Let me say a prayer, pray us out. And I will say the prayer from this past, I have it right here.
John, you weren't afraid.
This seems like a good bit of undigested food, this colic that we used last Sunday, which is one of my favorite Advent colics. And if you listen to it in light of the ghost coming and visiting Scrooge, let us pray. Stir up your power, O Lord, and with great might come among us. And because we are sorely hindered by our sins, let your bountiful grace and mercy speedily help and deliver us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, to whom with you and the Holy Spirit be honor and glory, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
And know that George Bailey prayed that prayer, and the Grinch prayed that prayer, and Scrooge prayed that prayer. It works for them. Y'all hang in there.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Great classes.